Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
That's right. I'm back. And hello again, my podcasting friends. Have you heard about this?
I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
Let's do it again.
I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Today we're going to talk a little bit more about radio. We're going to have a little history lesson today.
That's one small step for man.
I have the answer. Welcome to the Pat White Show. Let's get into it.
This is Sparta!
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into the Pat White Show. That's right, I'm back. And some would say, well, why did you leave? What happened to you? Well, I think as a courtesy to everyone, I'll tell you exactly what I know and how it all worked itself out. I'll let you decide for yourself whether it was a good plan or not. You see, I was at WOWO on the air with them from March 17th of 1997 until April of 2010, when management decided they wanted to go a different direction and bring in somebody else. Now, all that in between, there were some other things that were going on. And this goes back to probably around 1989, 1990. I like to talk radio. I was one of those people that enjoyed talk radio. And WOWO was, back in those era, they were trying to figure out where the heck they were. I didn't listen to WO that much simply because they were still playing music. They were an AM station. And FM was now the big thing. And you had all the FM stations coming up. And people in buildings could listen to FM because they couldn't listen to AM. Because AM wouldn't penetrate the walls of the building. Well, anyway, I was listening to a local station, an AM station that happened to have on a gentleman by the name of Rush Limbaugh. And everybody knows who Rush is. He's famous. And he was in over on 1250 WGL. And I would listen to him daily. And the owners of the station, Frank and Connie Kovis, decided to put out a call to say, hey, we'd like to do a local 1-hour radio show Monday through Friday. 1 hour, 8 to 9 in the morning. And I said, interesting. And they asked people to, if they were interested, they could apply to be on the station. So I sent them a letter, and here's my background, here's all the stuff I've done. And they called me in for an interview, and I met with them, and they said, okay, fine, you could do this. What day would you like? And I said, well, look, I'd like to be on Friday, the last day of the week. And they said, okay, that'd be fine. So for a year or so, maybe 2 years, every Friday from 8 to 9 p.m., I was doing a talk show. And that's fine. That's what I did. And one day there was in the winter, there was the Allen County Children's Home over on Lake Avenue had a fundraiser. And it was at the fairgrounds on the north side of town. And it was called the Chili Open. And they played golf on the snow. And it was just kind of outrageous. It was fun, and it was a good time. And inside the building, they had food and stuff. And people would come out there having a good time playing golf. So I was out there representing the station, and I ran into a guy named Gary Noe, N-O-E. Gary was the program director of WOWO. And we got to talking, and he said, hey, I said, how would you like to work for a real radio station? And I went, wow, WOWO? So as a result, I decided to leave GL and come to work as a part-timer for on WOWO. And Gary decided to have a 1-hour show daily. I think it ran from 6 to 7 every evening, following, I believe it was Ron Gregory. And it's in a different studio. And I started doing that show every day, Monday through Friday. I think it was 6 to 7. So my first radio talk show stuff. WOWO was trying to get into talk radio a little bit. Well, I did that, and then they decided they wanted to have a sports talk show from 6 to 7, and I was relegated back to part-time again. Because that's what happens when you're working, you're part-time. I was an hourly guy anyway. So they sent me back to the weekends, and that's where I was from 1992 until 1997. I just did Saturday afternoons. Sometimes football games were on, basketball games, and I wasn't on. But I was just a Saturday afternoon part-time guy. Well, ultimately, back in 1997, The folks over at WGL made a very, very serious contract violation involving Rush Limbaugh. They moved it around to some place or channel. I don't know what they did, but they made a mistake. And the network that controlled Rush Limbaugh was informed of that, and they told the folks over at WGL that, hey, you're losing the contract. And they did. And of course, the people in Limbaugh's people were looking at saying, hey, if we can get on a 50,000 watt station like WOBO as compared to, say, a 3,000 watt station like WGL, they're going to take the 50,000 watts. That's just the way it is. So they decided that they were going to move the programming over to WOWO. Now, at the time, WOWO was trying to transition into talk radio. They already had Glenn Beck in the morning. They had Sean Hannity in the afternoon. And that's what they had. But when they got Limbaugh, suddenly Limbaugh was noon to 3 guy. Well, WOWO had another problem. And the problem was simple. From 12 to 1, they had the farm show. And it had been there for years and years and years, the farm show. So what they thought about doing was they said, well, we could just tape delay Rush Limbaugh and start him at 1 o'clock and have him run from 1 to 5. Or actually 1 to 4, I'm sorry. 1 to 4. And then we could have somebody do afternoon drive from 4 to 7. And that was their plan in the beginning. Well, they didn't have anybody on the staff who could do afternoon drive, and the only person they had was me. So they came to me and said, hey, how would you like to do afternoon drive following Rush Limbaugh? Well, that's an honor to me. I mean, that's a big honor. And what I didn't realize was they didn't really think I would amount to anything. I don't think they believed that I would be good. I don't think they believed I would last long because they wrote up a contract. Contract was 1 page. That's it. Basically, they wrote the thing out on 1 page. Said how much money they would pay me for each hour. And another thing was they said, if you take us to number 1 in the demographic of 25 to 54, number 1, we will pay you a large cash bonus. Figuring that's never going to happen because WOWO was certainly not number 1. They were down in the middle of the pack back in those days. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. They put me on 1997. It was on March the 17th, the Ides of March. And by 2003 years, I had reached number 1. And from that time on, 2 times a year, because the ratings were taken twice a year, the general manager of the station would have to waltz in and hand me a check twice a year because I had them at number 1, 2554. And that lasted a number of years. And yet, in April of 2010, I was called into the program director's office. And at the same exact moment I went into the office, the general manager of the station suddenly slipped into that same office, sat down right next to me. And they proceeded in that meeting to tell me that I had been relieved. The word is fired, folks. That's the only thing you can say. I was being fired and replaced by my part-time guy that filled in for me, Pat Miller. He was taking the show over, and I was going to be out of a job. And they handed me a multi-page, and I mean a multi-page separation agreement. And it was basically non-disclosure agreement saying I don't say anything. But what was I going to do? I was employee at will, and they basically said, hey, you're not going to work for us anymore. You're done. We're going to put in somebody else. That's how it ended in April of 2010. Yeah, the next day, I was called by my friends over at WGL, called me and asked me if I wanted to come back, and ultimately I did. And I was there from 2010 till 2014 on WGL. So, after that, GL was sold to another company that changed the format and basically fired everybody from the radio station. So, I retired. Ended up moved up to Michigan for a year, and then down to Florida for 5 years. 2020, I returned to Fort Wayne, and that's where I am now. So that's what happened. In a nutshell, it's about the best I can tell you. Now you know all the information you need to know, but keep in mind, now I'm back. I'm on the air, And you'll be able to find me in the various places. Just check the listings, and you'll find exactly where you can find me and when you can find me. And I will be talking about things I like to talk about. So if you have a chance, be sure to tune in. We'll be here. We ain't going no place. Because right now, the internet allows people to have a voice. And now I have a voice once again. Coming up next. Well, welcome back on into the Pat White Podcast. And today we're going to talk about a period of history that is memorable for many, many people, especially those of us who are baby boomers. And it dealt with a time of year. Time of year was January. The year was 1978. And that was the year that we had the big, giant blizzard of 78. Now, I remember that only because things were going on in that particular time zone. I remember I was listening to the radio. I was out working. I was in sales at that time. And listening on the radio, and there was a station I listened to was WOWO, and the weatherman was a guy named Earl Finkel. And he was talking about a weather storm that was coming in from the southwest. And it was going to be pretty big storm. Now, back in those days, I don't think not everybody listened to it or paid attention because, well, we had our own little world. And frankly, we didn't necessarily believe what the weather people said because more often than not, the weather people were wrong. So folks went about their day thinking, another big deal, another big hype, but it didn't mean anything. It was on a Wednesday, as I recall. And that night, I remember going out to a discotheque. That's correct. 1978, I went to a discotheque. It was called the Bombay Eagle, located in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was on Wells Street over there where Evans Toyota is nowadays. And it was a discotheque that was also, not only a disco, it was a nice high-end restaurant. Two things in the same place. It was owned by a lady by the name of Helen Keenan Scent-Liver of the Scent-Liver Brewing Company and Scent-Liver charities and things like that. So that was her club. And people were in there discoing. That's what they did. They had the disco outfits. And trust me, I had the disco stuff, the disco suits and the open collars, the shirts. And it was an era. So it was a Wednesday night. I remember going there. And about 10 o'clock at night, I went out in the lobby and I looked out the door and I said, man, it's snowing. It's coming down. So at that moment, I made a decision to say, hey, I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here. 10 o'clock at night. And I was driving an Olds Cutlass back in those days. And from the distance of that discotheque on Wells to where I lived in the Canterbury Green apartment complex, it took me over an hour to get home. Over an hour. That's only a couple of miles away. But it was a long trek because it was snowing. Managed to get into my apartment and frankly, I decided to go to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning. Something woke me up, but it was noise. It was a howling noise. Grabbed my flashlight and my particular apartment's faced to the west with the windows and the screen porch and everything else. And so I got up, grabbed a flashlight and shined it out the window. And all I saw was when I shined the light out the window was white because the entire wall of that building I lived in was covered in snow and it was a blizzard going on. That blizzard was the blizzard of 78. Started on a Wednesday night, all day Thursday, and finally, Friday morning at 2 a.m., it quit. Quit and went on. And I remember at 2 a.m. in the morning, I heard noises of people outside the building talking because it was so silent out there and you could hear their voices. And you went out and you looked out and took a look. There were people out there walking around in the snow, or at least trying to walk around in the snow. But the snow was like nothing we'd ever seen. That snow was so deep that many folks couldn't get back to work until the next week. They were stuck in their homes or apartments, wherever it was, for 4 or 5 days. It was a monster snowstorm like few had ever seen, and those of us who got to see it and live through it never forget it. But one of the things I talk to people about saying, the things I remember about that particular blizzard, the blizzard of 78, was June. Now, that was months later. The blizzard happened in July or January, right? In June, there was a mound of snow in the Northcrest Shopping Center parking lot that finally melted in June of that year. Think about it. It took 6 months for a mound of snow to melt as a result of the blizzard of 1978. It's a time many of us will always remember. It'll stay in our minds. Many episodes, things to talk about. If you lived it, you know what I'm talking about. The blizzard of 1978. Coming up next. Well, hello, my podcasting friends, and welcome to the Pat White Show. And today, we're going to talk about music. Well, not just all music. We're going to talk about a specific year, actually a decade of music. That decade was the 1970s. And for those of you who were baby boomers, now, if you don't know, baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1960, I believe it was 1964. And those people in that demographic, and by the way, I happen to be one of those. I'm in that demographic. For us, the decade of the 1970s was probably the greatest decade for music ever. I mean, you could understand what they were singing. There were some great groups. The beats were great. And frankly, even today, some of that music still exists in today's broadcasting commercials. But if you think about it, the early 1970s, we had Three Dog Night going on. You had the Beatles, who had just broken up, so they were doing their own thing individually. And then, of course, you had the Carpenters, and who could forget the Carpenters? They were really great. And, of course, Neil Diamond, Creedence Clearwater Revival, CCR, from the Vietnam days, singing their songs. Yes, they were around, even Elton John, of course. But in 1975, something really unique occurred. And that something was a type of music called disco. That's right, disco came around 1975. And that was a whole new genre. I mean, it was so new and so different. People were actually going to places to get lessons to learn how to dance disco style. I know, because I did it. And they were going to these clubs. Clubs were popping up all around the America, and they were called discotheques, or discos for short. And people were all going to all these discos and having a great time and dancing and just enjoying themselves because the music had a certain beat to it. Music had a certain je ne sais quoi style to it. You could dance to it and had a beat to it. And all the music that seemed to go after 1975 till about 1979, all that music was, well, disco. That's what it was. But two particular groups, as I recall, actually led the disco concept. And those are two groups I want to talk to you about today. One of them, you still hear their work today in commercials on TV. Capital One, you know, what's in your wallet? The Santa thing going on? What are they playing? The Bee Gees. Because the Bee Gees were one of the great disco groups of the late 1970s. They were the kings. They had the music, they had the beat, they had the sound. People loved the Bee Gees. But there was one other group. And that's one that some people tend to forget about. And frankly, I was not a fan of this group during the 1970s. So, yeah, did I forget it? Yeah, I pretty much did. But it turns out they were actually as big as the Bee Gees. And some would say maybe even bigger. Who was the group? ABBA. That's right, ABBA. They had some of the greatest tunes, the greatest music, and frankly, people went crazy. And ABBA still exists today. When you think about it, remember the movie Mamma Mia? Mamma Mia was a huge winner. And many people went to see it, but it was ABBA. The music of ABBA was the big discotheque music. So now you didn't know, and for those of you who are fans of the music of the 1970s, you have now been informed the two biggest groups in discotheque era was the Bee Gees and ABBA. And like I said, Bee Gees, you're still seeing on those commercials for Capital One. And ABBA, yes, their music continues to exist, as well as that great movie, Mamma Mia. So there's a little bit of something you didn't know about the greatest year, the greatest decade of music was dominated in the last half in disco by two groups. Now you know. Coming up next. Well, fellow podcasters, welcome to the Pat White Show. We have another thing to talk to you about. This is money. This is your money. And now, if you live in California, this is definitely your money, but this is something that could occur to each of us every place we go in the United States. This could end up biting everybody in one way, shape, or form. Let me tell you, speaking of California passed a law that said the minimum wage for people working in fast food restaurants would rise to $20 an hour. $20 an hour if you work at a fast food restaurant. It takes effect in April of next year. Well, as it turns out, the two large Pizza Hut operators in the state of California have announced they are laying off all of their delivery drivers because of the rate of $20 an hour they'd have to pay these drivers. This is hundreds and hundreds of people. And as many as, I think, 1,200 members could be laid off. These job cuts are going to take place start through the month of February because, like I said, the law starts in April. But the Pizza Hut has made a decision to eliminate drivers, bring the food to your house. How it's going to get there, I don't know. Robots using drones to deliver your pizza, heaven knows how it's going to get there. But that's what Pizza Hut is doing in the state of California. They're saying, look, we can't afford $20 an hour for people driving to deliver the pizza to your house. Ain't going to happen. And they're laying off people left and right. It's going to be over 1,200 people laid off. Now, I'll tell you there's even more. Not only are they laying off people in California who are drivers, like I said, 1,200 and some of them, they're also raising the price of food at the fast food restaurants. Have already announced they are going to be raising their prices because of the higher cost of worker compensation. This is what happens when you raise the minimum wage. Like, oh, these people are in there. First off, let me tell you something. Most people, the average person working at a fast food restaurant, and I've worked at a fast food restaurant myself, so I'm not immune to this. It's a starter job. Get a little experience, they've got something on their resume, and they could go to the next facility to get a better job. Well, in California, you know what the current minimum wage in the state of California is? $16 an hour. Now, the restaurants tried to deal with that, but now they're raising it to $20 an hour. And the restaurants like Pizza Hut said, sorry, we're laying off all of our drivers. So, ain't going to drive around giving you your pizza anymore. You're going to have to come in and pick it up or have a drone deliver it to you or maybe some sort of robot. I don't know. But I can tell you this, there's people out of a job who need that job. And the people say, well, people working at fast food restaurants are poverty wages. You don't work at a fast food restaurant. I didn't work at a fast food restaurant. I worked there for a year, maybe 2 years, learning to work, learning to put in an effort. I was a dishwasher. That's what I did. I washed dishes in the back of the house. That was my job. But I moved on to something else. That's what people do. So now be aware. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, yeah, he thinks this is a great thing. Gavin Newsom is running for president. Don't forget that. Now you've learned something you didn't know. Raise the minimum wage, people are going to lose their jobs. And in California, 1,200 drivers are losing theirs. Now you know. Coming up next. Hello, boys and girls. Today we are going to discuss outrage, and I mean real outrage. Now you're saying, well, what would cause me to be outraged? Well, if you're a fan of the pro football circuit, and most Americans are in one way, shape, or form, you probably realize that when the playoffs came around and the NBC network decided they were going to take one of their playoff games, the one between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins, and they were going to put it on the Peacock television network. Now, that's a streaming network from NBC. Streaming networks are what is happening in America, folks, whether you like it or not. I happen to have streaming TV myself because I got rid of the cable like many, many people have done. We're dumping cable. Cable's dying. It's becoming internet. It's becoming streaming, which is internet. On my TV, I have 69 different applications, 69 different channels, and it's growing every single day. The people who own Comcast and also NBC and Universal and own everything else, for crying out loud, are realizing that people are bailing out of cable television. They are. Because why keep paying for that when you could just buy individual networks if you want to? Cable, you had to spend one price and get everything they gave you that you didn't watch 2/3 of it. So everything has moved over to the internet. Well, that game between Miami and Kansas City, you want the Peacock network, is going to cost you $5.99 a month. Now, NFL said, well, this is nothing more than an experiment. Experiment my patootie. It ain't. This is where it's going, folks. Whether you like it or not, TV is moving to money. That's what this is all about. Every television network is going to have their own cable or their own internet channel, and if you want it, you subscribe to that channel. All the football games. Remember when the football games used to be on direct TV, but you had to have the satellite dish to get that? I remember I lived down in Florida and I wanted to be able to watch the Colts, so I bought direct TV and got the satellite package. Yeah, it cost me a boatload, but that's what I wanted to see. Well, now it's on the satellite, but you could get it through the internet. That's right, you can get direct TV, the NFL, all the games live on your TV just by subscribing, just like you do anything else. That's where we're going. Yes, I understand that the most things watched on TV are football, and I don't disagree with that, but it's money. That's all this is about. And if you think it's anything else, you're living in la la land, because this is what's coming. Get ready, folks. The regular TV channels that you know are disappearing. You ever heard of Paramount Plus? Yep, now the studios have their own systems. Everybody is getting in on the action because they're going to say, if you want to watch it, you've got the internet, you buy our channel. You buy our stuff. No more sharing it with somebody else. Everybody's going to have their own little 2 cents worth. That's what's coming, and that's why that football game was on Peacock. That's not just an accidental, well, we're trying it out. No, it's not. That's what's coming. Get used to it. That's what's going to happen. Right now, Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime. Guess what? You got to subscribe to Amazon. You got to be one of the Amazon subscribers to get the Prime for free. I know because I'm paying for it. But it's during its regular season. Postseason, everybody wants to see it. It ain't going to work that way anymore, friends. Get yourself ready. You're going to be paying for every individual thing going on. I don't have cable anymore. I've got YouTube on TV. Costs me a lot less money, I can tell you that, but I'm still paying for it. And aside from that, 69 additional apps. I've got everything, and if I want it, I can pay for it. That's what's coming, folks. Get used to it. It's going to happen. Your football games and everything else that you like is going to be pay-per-view on an individual channel. Now you've been told, go talk among yourselves, but that's what's coming, whether you like it or not. And don't say you weren't informed, because I told you. See ya. Well, that does it for this episode of The Pat White Show. Be sure to follow the show on social media and stay tuned for next week's show. Like what you're hearing? Make sure you don't miss an episode by following The Pat White Show on Spotify. Just search for The Pat White Show, hit follow, and get ready for insightful conversations delivered straight to your Spotify feed. If you enjoy watching podcasts as much as listening to them, good news! The Pat White Show is also on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel now for visual content, behind-the-scenes footage, and full podcast experience. Find us on YouTube at The Pat White Show channel.